Hello, if everyone will take a seat, it looks like we only have a couple that don't. We'll just start here in a few seconds. Welcome, council. We're all here and accounted for. We appreciate all of you being here. We welcome all of you out in the audience. We appreciate your attendance, and I would expect that we'll probably have a few more that come along the way here. And we really do appreciate your participation and your interest. Let's start by having a Pledge of Allegiance, and I've asked our Dr. Bob Wing back here on the aisle if he'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're grateful to have with us Cammie Calder. She's the Stake Relief Society president in the Bountiful South Stake, and we'll ask her to offer a word of prayer. Thanks, Cammie. Amen. Thank you, President Calder. We appreciate that very much. So I think it would be appropriate to say that we had a primary election last night, and that we congratulate Kendallin for a wonderful campaign so far. We're just here. We're at halftime, but you're quite a ways away at halftime. So, in fact, I brought this little cushion because I kind of got my fanny kicked last night, and I'm kind of bruised. So, yeah, and it's kind of bruised, so I thought I would need it maybe just to sit on and sit a little taller today. You know, we have a beautiful day today. I don't know if I know we're talking about taxes, but when you look out there and you can see the mountains today, doesn't that feel good? And I think it's supposed to be that way for a little bit, so that'll be nice. Yeah, in a little bit when we do comments from all you folks, I'll give you some more instruction. But right now, I'll turn some time over to Gary.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight, what we'd like to do as staff is present a little bit of information for those. It will be repeat information for those that came to the property tax public or open house, and for others, it will be new information. But we'd like to talk a little bit about how the assessment and the taxation process works and how state law works relative to those. And then we want to take a few minutes to explain just exactly how much the tax increase is, and then finally what the purpose for the tax increase is. Hopefully that'll be information that will be useful in the public comments. So I'm just going to begin with sort of a property tax 101, and with a caveat that property tax isn't terribly well understood. It's challenging to understand, and years ago I built a model for myself so that I could understand how it's unique and how it works. And so I just kind of want to walk with everyone through a little bit how it works in Utah. Your property tax bill is based on just two factors only. It's a tax rate that's set by a taxing entity to raise a certain amount of money, and then it's the taxable value of your home. So if there are any changes to your tax bill, it's only one of those two things that could have changed. Either some entity like the city or the school district changes the rate, or the value of your home goes up or goes down. There are a few key points to remember as we talk through this scenario. The first one is that your home is assessed based on its fair market value. Now, that is a term that's in the Utah Constitution, and the process for that is the counties are responsible for determining the fair market value of your home. So the counties, every county has its assessors. They go through and on a regular basis assess homes however they do it, based on comps, based on formulas. But that assessment is determined by the county assessor's office, and it's based on fair market value according to the Constitution. The second valuable point to remember is that primary residences receive a tax exemption. So a primary residence is taxed at 55% of its assessed value. So a home's taxable value, if it's your primary residence, meaning that's where you live, it gets a 45% tax break. Secondary homes, so a cabin or a business, they don't receive a tax break. And then the third point, and this is probably the key, is that we have a unique law in Utah, sometimes we refer to it as truth in taxation, that a city, and this actually goes for any taxing entity, so the school district, anybody who levies a property tax, we are limited to receiving no more money than we received in the prior year, unless we go through a public hearing process and increase the rate, or if a new home is built in the home, or what we call new growth, a new home, a new garage, something like that. So this is a really key point. A city cannot receive any more money than it received the prior year unless we increase our rate or there's new construction. So what happens then is the tax rate goes down in order to make if values go up. And we're going to walk through a scenario to kind of show everyone how this works. But it's important to remember that increases in property value don't increase property tax revenue for a city. So these increased assessments that you're seeing, they don't actually result in any additional revenue for the city. And I know everybody's going, yeah, right. But we'll show you how that works. The best way that I figured out to do this for me is let's create a scenario where we have a brand new city, and in that city there's one home, okay? We're going to call our new city, Utah. In year one of New City, Utah, we incorporate the city, and there's one house only in New City. That home is assessed to be $250,000. Okay, that's the entire city. It's the entire assessed value of the city. So that home's $250,000, but it's a primary residence, and so it receives the tax exemption. So its taxable value is $137,500. Now, the City Council of New City decides we need $114.40 to run our city this year. That's it. We can provide all the services we need for that in huge one house for that much money. So to generate that amount of money, they set a tax rate of 0.000832, and that generates $114.40. So in year one, that one home of $250,000 pays $114.40 in tax, and that's their tax bill. It also is the same amount of money that the city collects. So year two, the county assessor comes by, and they reassess the home and determine it's now worth $300,000, maybe because some homes in the neighborhood across the street in another city were more valued. Whatever process they use, they reassess the home, just like we see it happens to all of our property tax bills. The home goes up to $300,000, which means its taxable value increases to $165,000. Now, if you remember, that state law, Truth in Taxation, says that a city can't receive any more money than it did the prior year, which was $114.40. So that rate then is adjusted down to be 0.000693. This rate is sometimes called the certified tax rate. The county tells us through a formula and process, they tell us what that rate needs to be so that we don't collect any more money. So you can see that in year two, the home value went up, but the city's rate went down, and the person paid the same amount of money, and the city received the same amount of money. Now, year 3, we have the same home, county assessor stayed away, but somebody decided to build a business. So we have a business come into town, and it's assessed at $200,000. Because it does not receive the primary exemption, its taxable value is also $200,000. Again, going back to the truth in taxation law, the city can't collect more from that first home than we received the prior year. So it's $114.40. So the tax rate stays the same. But because there's a new building in town, you apply that same tax rate, and it generates $138.67. So in year 3, the entire taxable value, because there was new construction, goes up in town. The tax rate stays the same. The first home's bill stays the same, but the city collects more money because there was an additional building. Things get really fun in year 4. This is where you start to see how this law can become confusing. So year 4, the county assessor comes back. They determined that the home value goes up to $350,000, which increases its taxable value. They also determined that the business's value goes up to $250,000. Now, so the total taxable value of the community is now $442,500. But because Truth in Taxation says that the city can't receive any additional money, we can only collect $253.07, just like the prior year. The tax rate goes down, just like we've seen. It goes down again to 0.000572. But now look what happens to the tax bill of the two properties. The home, its tax bill goes down. It goes from $114 to $110. But the tax bill of the business goes up to $142.98. It's kind of fascinating, kind of interesting, at least to me, maybe to nobody else. But it's interesting to see that even with these very, very simple examples, it can be counterintuitive that a property can go up in value and a city doesn't increase its tax rate, and yet there can be a tax increase. So why is this so complicated? Well, if every city had one home, and if there was only one taxing entity for everybody, it would be pretty easy to follow. But in Bountiful City, we have 43,000 residents, about 15,000 homes, and on top of that, we all live in multiple taxing districts. In addition to all of us being taxed by Bountiful City, we also all live in Davis County, which has a tax rate. We also all live in the Davis School District, which has multiple tax rates, as we'll see. We live in South Davis Fire District, Weber Basin Water District, the Mosquito Abatement District. We also have the County Library and Bountiful Irrigation District for many of us, and South Davis Sewer District, and finally South Davis Recreation. Each one of these entities has a tax rate in any given year that they could change. And many of them have multiple tax rates. The school district, for example, has 6 different tax rates. And so in any given year, if your tax bill changes, it's either because your home was reassessed or one of these entities changed its tax rate. So this is always a gee whiz question, but, and I've shown the answer, but how much of your tax bill goes where? 8% comes to Bountiful City. 9% goes to the special district, so that's the rec district and the mosquito and all of those combined. 64% goes to the school district. So of every $100 in property tax bill that we all pay, $64 goes to the school district. About 17% goes to Davis County. So here's some common questions that we receive at the city every time people get their tax bills, and more so this year because we're proposing this tax rate. Why did my property tax bill go up, or why did you raise my property tax? And the answer, as we've seen, is either someone increased their tax rate, but it might not have been the city, or your home or land is worth more. Another common question we get, and this one is kind of a fun one, okay, if no taxing entity increased its rate, but my tax bill still went up, then who's getting the money? Because as you can see by our model, in theory, if nobody increases their rate, but your tax bill, but your valuation goes up, where's that money go? You're paying more. What's happening to it? The answer is that your neighbors are getting that money because their tax bills are going down. Not everybody gets reassessed every year. So some will get reassessed. The others' tax bills will actually go down. They'll see a lower rate. Here's a very simple example. Because of truth in taxation and a city can't get any more money, let's take an example of 4 homes in a city. If one of those homes gets reassessed and goes up $3, then because of the law, all of the others have to go down to an amount equal to $3 so that there is no increase. I want to show you an example of this happening a few years ago. This is a tax bill from Summit County. And I hope everyone can see this on the bottom. I'm going to point you at the bottom left-hand corner here. I don't know if my arrow is showing up. It's not. So let's see. Pointer options. Okay. You can see that the prior year's value for this home, this townhome, was $136,000. On the tax bill that came out, the home was reassessed by the county to $156,000. That's a 5% increase in its valuation. County reassessed the property. But if you take a close look at what actually happens to the tax bill, it went from $801 to $793. The tax bill actually went down, even though the home was appraised for more. And I know that if everybody here looked at their tax bills over time, you will see years when you will pay less, or your home will be appraised for less because of this process. And that's just kind of how it works. And this is exactly how it worked in our example earlier. One went up, one went down. So Bountiful's tax rates since 1999, you can see this process taking place in Bountiful over time. Back in 99, we had a rate of .001261. In 2000, there was a property tax increase. That's this peak right here. And then over time, you could see that the property values went down a little bit so that the rate went up, and then rates went down. Rates went down as values in the community went up. You see this bump again right here. Well, this coincides with the Great Recession. And we all remember what happened to home values during the Great Recession. So as the values of homes went down, the city's rate went up to make sure that we stayed revenue neutral. And then since then, the property rate has basically declined. Here was a property tax increase that was done in 2018 by the city. And then here we are with this last year's property tax rate. It would be great if it weren't super complicated. Unfortunately, it tends to be a little bit, but I hope this has explained at least how the assessment process works and how our rate gets set when it comes to versus how much money we can collect. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Galen Rasmussen, our Assistant City Manager, so that he can kind of talk through now what Bountiful's proposing and how much that's going to affect homes.
Thanks, Gary. The proposed tax increase in the budget that has been adopted in tentative form thus far is $950,000. And hopefully my screen will come up here in just a minute. There it goes. Okay. So again, $950,000. That was adopted on June 22nd to address city expenditure needs and to balance with other revenue sources which we identify each year. To give you an idea of what that impact is for the average home, Davis County, as well as all the other counties in Utah, provide to cities or other taxing entities what the average home value is, the average market value, should say. And so in the case of this year, the average home in Bountiful, according to the Davis County assessor, is $434,000. So based on that particular home value, Bountiful's proposed tax increase for that size of home, that value of home, is estimated to be $62 annually, or if you factor it down to monthly, $5.17 a month. That would be the increased amount. The increase in Bountiful's rate, if you just look at Bountiful's rate, if you remember the circles that were going around, as Gary was mentioning, all the taxing entities that affect that, Bountiful City's rate alone is a 36.7% increase. But overall, when you get your tax bill, because those other entities are factored in, your overall bill that you'll pay will be about 2.2% more rather than the 36.7 because of the effects there. Just to give you an idea of where Bountiful sits as far as rates in, with other cities in the county, if you just look at their individual rates without adding any of the other taxing entities to it, looking back at the 2020 rate, which is the most current one we have available because others are going through truth and taxation processes, Bountiful was absolutely the lowest amongst all the other cities in the county. And the rate that was on 2020 was shown there and highlighted. When you look at the rates now with those 2020 rates again, and then you add in comparable taxing entities onto the city's rates for all the cities, including Bountiful, so that would be things like the irrigation company, the rec district, the fire district, and so forth, for any of the cities that have those. And then you get that comparison rate, and then factor in where Bountiful sits again. But putting in the rate that we're proposing to deliver that $950,000, Bountiful then is third lowest, third to the lowest in the county with the proposed rate. And so we are still a very low rate, even with that increase. And again, 11 cities are proposing rate increases this year, and so we're comparing with the 2020 rate just because we don't know what will be the outcome of those individual cities that are proposing rate increases. So again, just in summary, the amount that Bountiful has proposed for an increase in the 2022 budget is $950,000. The overall increase that you'll see in your bottom line for that average home of $434,000 is about a 2.2% increase. Bountiful's position in that is 36.7% increase. The effect would be $62 a year on an annual basis, or about $5.17 a month. And so now we'll turn the time over to Tyson Beck, our finance director.
Okay, thank you. So Gary and Galen have done a fantastic job of laying out some groundwork as to the real question of why. Why is Bountiful City proposing a $950,000 tax increase? So my job and my effort tonight is to try and help you understand the purpose. What is the why behind this proposed tax increase? So high level first, and then we'll dive in a little bit into the details. There are three overarching purposes for this proposed tax increase. Number one is to fund 3 new full-time employees at Bountiful City. Number two is to recapture some of the lost buying power that the city has lost on our property taxes due to at least 23 years of inflation. And then the third is to maintain our ability to operate as a pay-as-you-go financial entity. So that try and operate under that financial policy. So diving into the first point, the 3 new full-time positions at Bountiful City. These would be 2 new full-time parks employees and 1 for the information technology department. So the parks need for 2 additional employees has been driven by the expansion of our parks footprint and needing to continue to maintain all of the additional parks that have been added. So just in the past 5 fiscal years, Bountiful City's added 24.6 acres of park space to our maintenance footprint. Some of those include Creekside, Town Square, North Canyon, and soon to be Washington Elementary. So the maintenance footprints has increased, and the need for additional crews to maintain that has increased. So moving on to the IT department, the needs have been driven by increased service levels over time. The IT department, as it's currently structured, has been the same number of employees for at least 20 years. And I'm sure we can all think back 20 years and look at what we were doing with IT, and you know that the use of IT has expanded exponentially, as well as the need that we have as a city to rely on IT especially in this environment of ransomware and hacking and attacks. We need to make sure that our information technology department has the staff needed to continue to operate and to operate at a secure level. So moving on to the next point, trying to recoup some of the lost buying power of our property tax revenue. So just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as the definition of inflation. So inflation itself is rising of costs, the rising of cost of goods or services that we purchase. So for example, if we look at the cost of plywood before the pandemic, my father owns a hardwood flooring business, and he used to purchase plywood at about $15 per sheet. Now, if you try to go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy that same sheet of plywood, you're looking at more like $85 per sheet. So the rise in the cost of that plywood is an example of inflation. So the dollars are still the same, but it takes more dollars to purchase the same product that you used to buy. So looking back over this time span where Bountiful has not done any property tax increases to recoup inflation, if we looked back at $1,000 in the year 2001, we could actually buy $331 more with that $1,000 in 2001 than we could buy with that same $1,000 today. So Bountiful, again, we've not done any tax increases to try and recoup inflation over this time frame. So again, we're losing our buying power of our property tax revenue. So I plotted a graph to try and show this graphically. So on this top line, this blue line is the actual property tax that the city has collected over this 20-year time span. And then I plotted in this bottom line of how inflation has affected the buying power of our property taxes. So you can see that over this 20-year time span, we've actually lost $855,000 of our buying power in the property tax revenue. So that's a 33.5% decrease in our buying power of our property tax revenue. So the dollars that we've got are basically just the buying power of that dollar is being eroded. So moving on to the third purpose for why we're proposing a tax increase. We want to continue to maintain Bountiful as a pay-as-you-go entity. So when I'm talking about pay-as-you-go, what I'm referring to is we're saving for large projects and we're trying to avoid unnecessary debt. So we save in the good years and then we save it up for those years where we have large capital expenditures. So the intent with this is to save taxpayers money by not paying the cost of issuance for bonds or for debt, and on top of the interest that you pay whenever you go out for a bond or finance through debt. It also allows the city some financial flexibility. So for instance, the city has many departments, light and power, water, stormwater, garbage, recycling, the main administration. Within all of these different departments, we've been truly fortunate to have some reserves that we could allow some interfund transfers or some interfund grants, if you will. And that allows us to actually, in many cases, avoid putting out debt for some of our enterprise funds or other utilities. So it gives us financial flexibility to, as a city, save the overall taxpayer money by not going out to debt. So I wanted to take us back 30 years and look at how the financial policies were of the city 30 years ago. In a memo that was provided by the city manager to the city council, this statement was made, and I wanted to read it because it does highlight what was being done back then and what we're still continuing to try to accomplish today. The city's financial policy has been to utilize reserve funds to meet its philosophy of pay-as-you-go financing for capital improvement needs of the city. We have been successful in keeping our taxes low and our user charges low, while at the same time providing a high level of service. However, we will have to adjust our taxes and our user charges if we are to maintain a strong financial base, which allows us to avoid bonding as a means of financing needed system improvements. This will be particularly true as our infrastructure continues to age and the need for maintenance, repair, and ultimate replacement becomes more pressing. So the intent is, again, to avoid unnecessary debt as much as possible and save the taxpayer money by not paying interest and saving away for the future projects that we know are coming down the road. So again, on this concept of trying to continue as pay-as-you-go, the city's capital projects fund can kind of be viewed as the city's savings account for anything capital related for taxpayer purposes. The city's capital savings are being depleted. A property tax increase is needed in order to protect our ability to continue to be a pay-as-you-go entity. So recently, we've had significant capital outlays that have shrunk our capital savings. And we've also noticed that there have been negative financial trends where our sales tax dollars are being used more on our operating costs than they are to be saved away for future needs. So in the last 5 fiscal years, the Capital Projects Fund has paid out $27.4 million of the capital savings on large and infrequent projects, Creekside, Town Square, North Canyon, just to name a few. And these, again, have added that 24.6 acres of additional park property to our maintenance footprint. So you can see that we're increasing our service or our expenditures without any corresponding increase to our revenue stream. And just from a personal bank account standpoint, if you're spending more than you're bringing in, your bank account is going to deplete, and if you don't find a way to reverse that trend, you won't have any money for the future. So again, we're trying to maintain the current properties that we own and the investments that we've already made and ensure that we can maintain these into the future. So just to graphically help you understand what this negative trend looks like, I've plotted the sales tax of the city, and I've said, all right, how much are we using to just operate versus how much we're using to save away for capital projects? So back in fiscal year 2002, the city's overall sales tax was split, where 4% went to operate and 96% went to our savings, our capital savings, where we could save for the future. In our budget for fiscal year 2022, that flops to where 73% of our sales tax dollars are being used to operate, and only 27% of our sales tax dollars are being saved away. So again, we know that we've been seeing this negative trend for quite some time, and the needed correction is to increase the property tax so that we're not using so much of our sales tax just to operate. So again, we're not saving away our sales tax dollars like we used to. So I wanted to show you the past 14 fiscal years of Bountiful City. And so this would be from our final audited year from fiscal 2020 back to 2007. And what I did is I plotted out here on this orange line the actual sales tax revenue that's going into our capital savings. And then I also said, all right, what on average, how much of our sales tax is going into the capital savings? And on average, it's $3.9 million over the past 14 fiscal years. I also said, so that's our revenue stream. That's our ability to replenish our bank account. How much are we spending out of that bank account? So I went back and I looked over the past 14 fiscal years, and on average, we were spending 4.498, so basically 4.5 million every year in capital expenditures. So you can see here in the middle, so that average expenditure line is this green line. The average sales tax revenue is the blue line below. So you can see that there's a gap, and that gap is about $550,000. So again, we know that from a personal finance perspective, if our costs going out are $550,000 more than our revenue coming in or our income, we're in a very poor financial situation. So this negative trend that we've been seeing is what we're trying to correct and ensure that our capital savings can continue to be a savings account that we can utilize for all of our capital needs, whether that be roads, whether that be snow plows, whether that be park replacement or park infrastructure. So that's what we're trying to maintain and ensure that we're trying to be a pay-as-you-go entity. So again, we're looking at the past 14 fiscal years of data. I want you to know that we've also looked and tried to look forward. So we look to the past and say, what has the past taught us? But we also say, how do we look going forward? What does the future look like? So we've done many models and spent a lot of time in many public meetings talking about the future of Bountiful City. So in the models that we've presented, we looked forward, and even with the $8 million that would come in from a reimbursement on the Washington Park through bond proceeds, we saw that our negative trend continues, and we'd not be able to continue to be a pay-as-you-go entity if we don't take corrective action. So again, we've looked to the past to help us understand where we might be going into the future. And that's why we've been coming to the conclusion that a tax increase is necessary to continue to maintain our ability to be a pay-as-you-go entity. So I wanted to just help everyone understand a little bit about Bountiful's policy of trying to be a pay-as-you-go entity. This is not a unique policy, and it's as everyone knows in their personal finances, it is wise to save today for the future capital expenses that you have down the road. So I just wanted to help you understand that Bountiful does this, but there are also comparable cities to Bountiful that do the same practice. So I went back to the audited financial statements of a few different comparable cities to Bountiful, and I said, what were their cash reserves, or what were they keeping in store for their future needs? So Bountiful, you can see in 2020 had $33.7 million in our combined between our general fund and our capital projects fund, so basically our savings. And how did that compare to some of these other cities? So with Logan, you can see that they were at 32.8 million, Murray 25.5, Lehigh 31.9, and Draper 37.1. So we're not the highest, we're not the lowest, we're middle of the pack in comparison to these cities. So keeping these types of reserves and these capital savings truly is an important practice. It's a sound financial policy, and that's what we're trying to maintain and keep well into the future, because we do believe that it does save taxpayer money over the long haul. So I know I've talked a lot about why we're raising taxes, and I've only focused on the tax perspective. So I'm sure many of you are asking yourself the question, why doesn't the city just spend less? We've looked at the revenue side. Why not look at the expense side? So I wanted to just touch on this almost on a personal level, if I may. So I've been working for the city for 6 years, and it's been fantastic. I've had my eyes opened up to many things that I did not understand before. So before I came to the city, I was probably like many of you, where I had reservations about how the city spends its money, and what possibly might be cut out of the budget that would be superfluous, or maybe some fat that needed some trimming. And I'll admit there was some skepticism. But after the 6 years of in-depth budgeting and in-depth analysis of the city's finances, I've changed my mind completely. The skepticism is gone. I can honestly stand before you and say that I believe Bountiful City is a well-managed city. They use the funds of the city very well and very prudently. And I'm proud to be a Bountiful City employee. And I can say that very honestly, because I look at what Bountiful City provides. I look at the services that are provided by your property tax dollars. And I think of the medical services, I think of the policing, I think of the parks and open space, and I'm proud to be a part of that, a very small part of that in the finance realm, but I'm proud to at least help those operations move forward. So I also wanted to help just identify a couple items that might help ease your mind a little bit about the city's use of your funds. So the
Tyson,
budget, yes,
can I just
please.
ask one thing?
Yeah.
Would you tell them what you did before you came here for 6 years?
Yeah, of course. So for 7 years before I came to Bountiful City, I was an independent auditor for a local CPA firm, and mostly focusing on government audits. So, and I actually was the city's auditor for 7 years. So.
And Tyson, if I may. Where do you live?
I live in Bountiful. Thank you for pointing that out, Millie.
Back to you, Tyson, please.
Yeah, I am a Bountiful resident, and I love Bountiful. I grew up here, and I only moved away for a short time up at Utah State and for a 2-year service mission, and I don't think I'll ever leave Bountiful. It truly is an amazing place. So the city's budgeting process is a very rigorous process and very detailed, and its aim is to be prudent with the city's funds. The city also ensures that we continue to maintain the investments we have. We put dollars back into the projects that we currently have so that they maintain their value, so that they are beautiful, that people want to come and be in our parks and open spaces and in our buildings for public use. Bountiful is also subject to the rising costs just like everyone else. It costs us more to operate just like it does every one of us in our personal finances. So over time, inflation just takes its toll, and we have to take corrective action in order to provide the same level of service that we always have. And I will say that Bountiful truly is a well-managed city, and that's not just me speaking from a biased staff perspective. You can look at the fact that we are such a low tax rate in Davis County, and even though we're the second largest city in Davis County, in 2020, again, we had that very lowest tax rate. And even with the proposed tax increase, we'd still be the third lowest. So that helps you understand that taxes are low in Bountiful, and we've kept them low based off of this pay-as-you-go mentality and operating policy. And you can compare our power rates to Rocky Mountain power rates. You can compare our fees and charges to any other city, and you'll see that we are low in our fees and our taxes. So an independent study is done every year by an association called the Utah Taxpayer Association. Their intent is to look at the top 50 cities in the state and evaluate those top 50 cities based off of the rates and the taxes that they charge their residents. So the 2021 report came out from the Taxpayers Association, and they ranked Bountiful as the third best city of the top 50 cities for revenue from taxes and fees per capita. So per person, how does Bountiful compare based off of our taxes and our fees to all of those other 50 cities? And we were third best in that ranking. And we also were third best for taxes and fees per $1,000 of citizen income. So when we look at the median income of Bountiful residents, how do our taxes and fees compare to that median income? And again, we were the third best city of the top 50 cities in the state. And when I say top 50, they're looking at population. So again, Bountiful is a well-managed city, and my office is always open to those who have specific questions about its budgeting or about its finances. I'm always willing to answer questions, but we can look to outside entities to help confirm that Bountiful is being managed prudently. So again, on this pay-as-you-go financial policy, I wanted to again pull back 30 years and look at this memo again from the city manager to the council. At times we are criticized by citizens for having such funds and for accumulating ratepayer or taxpayer dollars. However, the council's policy of prudent financial management has served us well, and we would recommend that we continue the establishment, growth, and preservation of these funds as logical and desirable manner to finance city government. So again, we're trying to maintain this pay-as-you-go mentality. So just again as a summary, the proposed property tax increase is $950,000. This is to fund 3 new full-time positions for our fiscal year 2022 budget. It's to recapture lost buying power of our property taxes due to at least 23 years of inflation. And it's to maintain our ability to operate under a pay-as-you-go financial policy. How does this affect the personal pocketbooks? 2.2% increase of our combined tax rate, so the combined total of our tax bill, only a 2% increase there. If you looked at Bountiful's specific rate, it is a 36.7% increase. And how does that hit us in the pocketbook? $62 per year, or $5.17 per month on a $434,000 home. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Tyson. I'm asking the council to make sure that they write down their questions. You're going to have plenty of time to make comments and so forth. We're going to turn some time over in a moment to this ordinance, and we'll ask Galen Rasmussen to do that. Let me just make a couple of statements. I think that I'm privileged to be able to say, and that is, you know, the vision of Creekside Park and the vision of having our park downtown, having our square, our town square, what we're going to do at down on the west side of our city, at Washington Elementary. These things all cost money. They do. But these weren't the vision of the staff. These were the visions of our team, which includes the staff and all of the city council. On all of these things, there was a ton of work that went into them, and they were expensive. But they are fabulous. I'm very proud of Bountiful, what it is and what it looks like and what we've done for the future. A lot of what is being done is for the future. And what I know is that this was no easy process. This is a process that takes time and that has been unanimously by our council to do these projects because we knew that they would be valuable for our future. One other comment. So one piece of good news. You know all the circles that we saw up there around our house of all the taxes. I'm on several of these boards with those circles on them, including the fire district and also the rec district. And you know, the rec district, we're wanting to expand and do some things because a couple of years ago we had 250,000 or 250 of our children that didn't get to play jazz basketball because we didn't have the facilities. So over time, we're going to have to grow because Davis is going to grow. But as we looked at it, I talked with Mayor Arvey this last week, who's the chairman of the board, over to the rec district. And together, we gave advice to the rest of the board that this could wait. This could wait for a bit. How long, I do not know. But I think we'll formalize that on Monday, that's just one of those circles you won't have to worry about this year. And we all felt it's amazing. We all felt really, really good about it. We're excited about what we're thinking and so forth about the rec district in the future. But there's just too many things this year for sure. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And at least in all of these things that we're talking about, which makes sense, there is some good news. Okay, with that, Galen, I'm going to turn some time over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mayor and members of the council. Tonight's the culmination of several months that all of you have been involved with, as well as members of the public that have attended some of the budget meetings we've had. We started out in January with staff looking at our expenses and revenues and coming up with recommendations that go through review by the city manager, myself, and our finance staff as well, and then putting together a council committee budget document that you all review through April, and 6 different committees, of which 3 of each of you are on each of those committees, and go through each of these budgets in detail after the city manager and myself have gone through those with each of the department heads that have prepared those budgets. And then following that, in May, there was a tentative adoption of the budget. And because between the time of the tentative adoption and where we are now, a decision was made to pursue a tax increase to fund additional items and things which Tyson has gone over. And so because of that, where we would normally adopt the budget in June and then start operating in July 1st, because of that, we had to, by state law, which was referred to as Truth and Taxation, adopt a tentative budget again that included the revised figure for the taxes that were sought. So that's what the budget that is tentative now versus what was tentative in May is primarily the difference. And it also brought about the need, if that revenues in there, that less will be having to be drawn from our reserves. And so that's what, if you were to look at the documents, that's what it would show. And tonight, we are here for two primary purposes. One is to consider this tax increase, which the proposed tax rate is 0.000967, and that would return an amount of money over the certified rate of about $950,000. And the second, second component to that is to hear from the public on what their viewpoints are on that tax increase. Following that public comment and discussion, which has been had tonight, then it'll come before the council to adopt Ordinance 2021-09, which adopts the property tax rate and revenue and a few other things, including the formalization adoption of a final budget that includes that figure for property tax. And then we would be formally underway for the fiscal year. Right now, we're operating on a tentative budget because of that process. So now, Mayor, if you would consider opening a public hearing, closing that public hearing after that discussion, and then going to that ordinance.
Perfect. Thank you, Galen. So with that, I will open this to a public hearing, maybe with just a little bit of instruction if I could. We'd like you to just take 2 to 3 minutes, if you would, in your comments. We don't have a buzzer up here today, but we do have a little time. Miranda will just put that little time element up there, and if you could get your thoughts in there in that amount of time, that'd be appreciated. I would also encourage you, if a person has said exactly the way you feel and what you are doing, you're welcome to come up anyway. But if you feel like it's been said, we may encourage you a little bit to maybe not have to come up. But the meeting, the public comment, it's your time, and it's supposed to be your time. So if you'll when you do come up, give your name and your address. The staff will write down answers and take your questions and help you with answers. And let's see, was there anything else? And you know what? I don't need to really say this because this is what Bountiful does, but let's just be respectful. You know, we do it a Bountiful way. It's not like what we see on TV, and things just get out of control. Let's just be respectful for and with each other. Gary, were there any other items that any other instruction maybe that I didn't remember to give?
No, just maybe a clarification that we'll note down if there are questions, and then we'll answer those at the end of the public comment period.
Okay, they'll answer the best they can, which is going to be good. So with that, this public hearing is now open to you, and you're welcome to come to the podium. Please kind of bring that microphone kind of close to your mouth so that those in the back can hear you, even though you're facing here to the council. You're welcome to come up.
Mr. Mayor, and to the rest of the city council, I'm Earl Thomas. I live at 1287 North East Hills Drive in Bountiful. I've been a resident of this community all of my life. I'd just like to compliment, first of all, to you, Mayor, and to the rest of the city council. This is not an easy job you have. I recognize that. I've served on a lot of citizens committees in this community. You have a difficult assignment. And I recognize that you have taken the time, many times on some of these events where money is being spent. But I still feel like that there are a few places perhaps we need to use a little better judgment. That's all I will say from that aspect. As a senior citizen and looking at my other neighbors, you need to recognize that within our city, it's only been a very few years ago that we were at 1.4 per household. Now, how do you get it to 1.4 per household? Gary, I can't give you that statistic today to be accurate, but that's where we were 10 years ago when those ratings came out. What I'm saying to you is that means you have a lot of senior citizens still living within your community. and quite frankly, put it into a budget form for our side. When I look at that with goods and services that it's going to take in my household to run for this next year, that's about $2,000 a month. Now that takes into consideration your utilities, all the rest of the tax load that we get from other parts of the county. That takes into consideration my grocery bill, my gasoline bill, my car bill, and all the rest of this. Now if we follow with this 30% inflation thing that we're looking at that's facing us in the next year, if you take 30% on a $2,000 a month budget, that's $6,000 or $600 a month. That's $7,200 more per year that we're going to see go out of the sky without any new tax increases. When I look at that from the standpoint, if you cut it back to 10%, that's still $200 a month. With where you're going with the county, the fire department, all the rest of these entities that's putting their tax increases on us this year, that increases my costs $650 more a year. Can I come and get an assessment against the city and pick back up $650 a year? No, I can't. But you want me to go out and pick it off the tree. So all I'm asking of you, be careful what you do to us as senior citizens. I have one of my neighbors that's going to put their home up for sale because they can't afford another tax increase of another $650 a year between yours and the county and the fire department and all the rest of these. That's $62 a month. Doesn't affect somebody that's earning power, hasn't gone away. But if you're on a fixed budget, it becomes a pretty serious problem. It isn't going to affect me because I've planned well enough that I can do whatever you want to do. I'll pay your $82 more a year, but to your figures that you have at the $434,000 per home, my home is at $307,000 this year. My taxes are going to be $86. They're not going to be your 64 or 62. Well, $20 isn't going to make or break me. But I got several widows in my ward and my neighborhood that another $2 on every one of these things that you're putting on is going to kill a lot of these people from a financial aspect. They're going to sell homes, have to move in with other people. So be careful what you're doing. I want to thank you again for your time, your sacrifice away from families, and everything that you do to run this city. I'm proud of you. I think you've done a great job. And I can only say to our city manager and his assistants and others, I'm proud to live in Bountiful. It's been a great city. It's been a great place to live. Wonderful police department. And all the rest of the services that you provide. But there's only so many dollars many of my neighbors can pick off the tree, and when they're gone, there are no more dollars to even meet your extra $86 a year you want from me. Thank you.
It's a little more than 2 or 3 minutes, but we're glad to give it to you, Mr. Williams. But we just want to remind you of the time card. Thanks.
Is there a comment that you make after that, or is that it? Great. My name is Jeremy Barlow, and I live at 851 Canyon Crest Drive. And I'm a relative newcomer to Bountiful. I moved in when my daughter was a baby, and she just graduated from Bountiful. But so I guess I'll echo what this good gentleman said about the efforts to put together all of that. I've written PowerPoint slideshow or slide presentations, and that's a ton of effort, and to audit the numbers and all of that, that's awesome. So I do appreciate that. I'm thrilled. I rode North Canyon Park this morning, or North Canyon Trail this morning, and I jumped off my bike and I pulled a couple of logs up, so there's already some erosion that's happening there. I'm thrilled to know that the parks is going to get some much needed staffing, I guess, and to list that. I was curious just to know the difference between this tax and the municipal, or the bond that we passed recently, and just where's the allocation, and how's that different than what we're proposing here, and that's it. Thanks again for all your efforts, and yeah, I'm with that gentleman saying, you know, we don't all want to see our taxes climbing. Nobody comes here wanting to pay taxes, including all of you, and I respect that. But, no, again, thanks. Appreciate your prudence.
They've written that down, they'll, at the end, they'll answer your question.
Cool, thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I'm Tom Hardy, 3290 South Sunset Hollow Drive, and I'm the one that was quoted. So I may ask, based on that quote, for a minute or two more. When I came to Bountiful as city manager, I was hired in 1980. We had no reserve funds. Those funds were built up over time, and I'm proud of the reserves that we had when I left. Now, since I left, for the last 8 years, somebody said, well, how come you didn't increase property taxes for all that time? And the answer is because other revenue sources were growing. There's no need to increase property tax if your other revenues are growing sufficient to meet your budgetary needs. So I went back and I looked at Bountiful City's budget over the last 8 years. In 2013, 2014, Bountiful got a little over $6 million, or budgeted a little over $6 million in sales tax, $6,020,000. In the tentative budget this year, you budgeted a little over $10 million in sales tax revenue. That's an increase of $4 million, or about 67%. There's a reason that you don't have to increase property tax if other revenues are growing. And by the way, that's great growth. I wish when I'd been here for the 31 years I was manager, we had that sort of growth. The tentative budget, and correct me if I'm wrong, included the 3 new positions. Is that right, Tyson? Okay. And that budget was presented to you on May 11th and had no tax increase, and the city manager's transmittal letter to you said it was balanced with regard to revenues and expenses. So if you adopt the tentative budget tonight, those 3 positions are funded, and the only difference would be whether or not you're going to have $4 million of additional need in the capital projects fund, or a little over $3 million in need in the capital projects fund. But next year, when you issue the bonds, you'll get an infusion of over $8 million. And to meet the trend, need, and the identified policy, and I did watch Monday night your council meeting, you will not cross that line. You will have sufficient, without any tax increase, revenues to be well above your threshold that you as a council set. You said that Bountiful's rates are low. We had an increase in 2018. I think it was about 14%. When you issue bonds, our taxes are going to go up another 20%. That's 34%. If you adopt this tonight, that's 37% more. That's 70% in 5 years. The fire district, which didn't exist as a taxing entity a few years ago, has increased their certified tax rate twice tremendously. Now, Bountiful says we have a very low tax rate, but you don't include in there what we pay to the fire district. You may not think that those are taxes you impose, but we as taxpayers, when we get our tax notice, know that we pay it. Do you want me to stop?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Stephanie Humphrey. I live at 847 Chelsea Drive. My family has been living there for approximately 42 years. Sorry, I'm short. Short and fat doesn't make for fun. Anyway, my question is to probably Tyson and his supervisor regarding why in 23 years there has not been an adjustment for the cost of inflation in materials and services that are outside contracted and purchased by Bountiful City. I'm an accountant by training. I fail to understand why you would go more than 5 years without looking at that and seeing some type of an adjustment being necessary and doing that along the grid as opposed to an $800,000 jump in 1 year. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Next.
My name is Sergei Liston. I've lived in Bountiful since 1938. I'm 84 years old. My income went up last year 1.6%. My income, that's my spendable income, my only income, went up 1.6%. I'm looking at this thing that you sent in the mail. I appreciate that. It looks like you're talking about $230 increase. But my taxes were something like last year, $1,800, $1,800. And it's going to go up probably a little over $2,000 this year. Now, how the hell am I supposed to pay that?
Thank you. Please.
Honorable Mayor and City Council members, my name is Jeremy Jepson. I live at 1343 South, 425 West in Bountiful. I bought my home here in 2009, and I love Bountiful. But I even love being an American more, and I'm grateful that I have the First Amendment right to take my complaint to you today, and that you can't cut my head off. I have 21 years of experience working for the executive branch of government. I have a master's degree of public administration from Brigham Young University, and a significant portion of my MPA program dealt with taxes. I can't see why. I mean, it's a public administration. It's basic funds for government. In fact, my paycheck depends on taxes. But taxes have always been a struggle of this nation. The Boston Tea Party was partially because the American colonies did not have representation in the British Parliament. Today we pay taxes, lots of taxes. But representation is questionable because often elected government officials don't listen to the will of the people. Once elected, a lot of you do whatever you want. Bountiful hasn't always listened to the will of the people. For example, the money that you spent remodeling City Hall. Bountiful now claims that their purchasing power has decreased and they need 3 more employees. Last year, because of inflation, which will only get worse tomorrow because of the multiple trillions of dollars spent yesterday, my purchasing power was eliminated. I can hardly afford to put gas in my car. A basket of goods last year cost me significantly less than the same basket of goods this year. And I'm trying to support my family on my income alone, which is barely more than $50,000 a year. But my pay rate has not increased. My home values in my neighborhood this last year alone increased over $100,000, which is astronomical. But now Bountiful City, the sewer district, the fire department, and the school district are all trying to get into my pocket. The combined tax, if approved by all 4 of those agencies, will cost me $412 a year, which is almost half of my monthly mortgage payment. Taxes are regressive. That means it's harder for me to pay property taxes than it is some other people in the same city. Listen to the will of the people here tonight and do not raise taxes. listen to the will of the people, and do not buy things you cannot afford. If you do buy things you can't afford, then you have to liquidate something, because I have nothing left to give. And one more thing, if you really do need more public employees, hire more police officers. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name's Ted Woolley. I live at 1750 South, 1300 East here in Bountiful. I just wanted to point out a couple of things, additional revenue that, that you're collecting, also some additional, they weren't taxes, but costs that we have to pay. So I noticed on my Dominion gas bill, you get 6% tax on that of income. And then I noticed a couple of years ago, you put in a monthly streetlight charge of $2 a month. You also added a customer charge that wasn't there a couple of years ago of $16 on the power bill. And then you're moving, of course, money from the power company into saying that you're decreasing our taxes, but you increased our taxes on one side, and it's a regular amount that's taken. It's not a percentage, it's a regular amount. Of course, adding Washington Elementary is going to hurt us a little bit. When I felt very strongly that the school district would keep that because they needed the practice fields to stay in compliance with the state. And you keep saying we have the lowest rate in the county, but you've added some of these things that really aren't part of the tax bill, but it's affecting us monthly. You say 23 years of inflation weren't covered, but what you showed us is there were tax increases along the way in the last few years, so I was a little confused on that. So we're also dealing with the loss of buying power. You've heard from the other gentlemen and ladies that have talked, and it's, I think, some of the overruns were just kind of ridiculous on Town Hall and on the city square that, Bountiful City residents were forced to pay because of the overruns there, which affected everybody, and of course it lowered your the buying power, it lowered your capital funds things. The suggestion is instead of getting 2 FTEs for parks, why not get some seasonals to use them during the time when the parks are used, not during the winter time when they're not used, instead of having somebody full-time there. So you can get a lot more seasonals than you can for 2 FTEs. So I just wanted to conclude that, you guys are kind of guilty by association because so many taxing entities are increasing taxes this year or proposing to increase taxes. They've already been mentioned. I'm not sure if you're all aware that we've had a pandemic for 1.5 years. People have lost jobs. People have lost their buying power. The examples for the plywood, I think, is kind of out of line because some of these building things are, of course, very expensive now. But not everything has jumped that high, but it's going to be jumping. I was very glad that Mr. Hardy was here because I don't want to repeat what he said. But I think he had some very good points. You had a balanced budget to begin with, and now all of a sudden you want another $950,000. So anyway, you're affecting the citizenry here in their buying power. As was mentioned, some of us are on fixed income, I being one of them, and you're just going to make it hard for a lot of people. And again, I thank you for your time. Like I say, you're guilty by association. My taxes, if everything's proposed passes, $520 a year, and that's it's not chicken feed. So. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thanks, Mr. Woolley.
My name is David Taylor. I live at 861 Fairway Drive. I'm just curious why there was no discussion on depletion of reserves when there was a move to buy the Washington School property and to bond and borrow $8 million. The fact that we were depleting our reserves was never raised. If you would answer that question for me, I would appreciate it. 36% is it's a huge amount. So the term I keep hearing here is trend, trend, trend. Some of you have been here for over at least 8 years, and you just sit back and watch a trend. It's not an event, not something that you couldn't foresee, but you watch a trend and you do nothing. That's not leadership. That's not stewardship. I think you should be ashamed. 36% is a big chunk. There are people on fixed incomes. It's like she was saying, this is death by 1,000 cuts. Every single entity wants just a little bit. And to sit here year after year as the funds go down, 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 and then come back and say, we want 36%, you should be ashamed. It's very disappointing.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Mayor and council and staff, for hosting us tonight and giving us the opportunity to listen to what you have to say and to ask questions. A couple of comments and questions. One of them is related to the increase. I heard the increase was due to pay-as-you-go needs, also increased staffing and inflation. And the inflation seems kind of unique to me. When I look at the information that you provide on your website, about half of the general fund revenue is from sales tax. And I guess I'd like to hear, when goods and services go up, and due to inflation, doesn't your sales tax revenue also go up? So isn't there almost like a safety net built in to your revenue stream due to inflation, because sales tax is a big piece of that? So that's one question. The second is you know, I've worked in industry for many years in operations, and one of the things that we did occasionally was to bring in outside firms or have initiatives internal, which really took a hard look at how we were doing operations from an efficiency standpoint. And I guess my question to you, Mr. Mayor, is when was the last time the city of Bountiful conducted or had an outside firm come in and take a look at operations from an efficiency standpoint and see where savings could be made? And the last point is, I also have many of the questions that Mr. Hardy had asked, and I'll be very interested in hearing a response to those. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I don't think we got your name. I'm sorry. I thought I just didn't get it written down, but
No,
nobody
I
got it
forgot to
written
mention.
down.
My name is Kurt Kost at 1144 Sunset Hollow Drive. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Anyone else, please? Oh, good. Just pull that right now.
We women are not being represented.
Perfect.
So I'm wondering if I can get my extra time. I'm here also for my neighbor who is a widow of 90
And your name?
years. Oh, I am Carrie Collister. I live on 2175 Carolyn Way. And my neighbor today showed me her mortgage payment. She had a mortgage payment of half of what she pays in taxes now every month in property taxes. She spent her whole life paying her mortgage down, working. She finally retires. She's on a fixed income, and you are taxing her double her house payment. Take your house payment, double that, and think of paying that the rest of your life because you own your home. Doesn't make sense. Property tax should be immoral. It really is immoral. And there are other ways to do it. Then for myself, those same 23 years, do you realize inflation has hit me as well? Every day, inflation hits my budget. And how do I deal with inflation? I can't go to you and say, give me some more money. I need more money because inflation's hitting me really hard, especially this year. And it's only going to get worse. I've lived in 3 foreign countries, and one of them was Germany. And we look like Germany in 1934. We're in for hyperinflation. And I have a budget I have to live within. And what do I do when my expenditures are higher than my budget? I find ways to cut my expenditures. I adjust. I go, maybe I need to change the entertainment budget and lower that because I have this expense. I have to pay for electricity. I have to buy food. And I choose to lower other expenses. And you can do that too. You can look at the budget. You could be creative. Do you know when we had that windstorm, how many FEMA dollars did we have to use to get rid of all those trees? I found out there are more chainsaws in my neighborhood than there are taxes in this country. And all those chainsaws were carried by volunteers. Have you thought about using volunteers? I have volunteered at the Bountiful Library since early 1990s. And they haven't given me a dime. And I have given them many services. And I think Bountiful is full of people like me. I think I am totally unexceptionable. I am just an ordinary citizen, and I love to volunteer. And when they ask me at the library, you should work here. You're here so often, and we could pay you. And I say, oh, that would take all the fun out of it. That would take all the fun out of it. It's such a joy to volunteer. And I believe every citizen of Bountiful feels the same way. Have you thought about, couldn't most of that work at the parks be done by volunteers? And I remember Kate saying in her newsletter how wonderful it was. All these youth came together for the trails, something to do with the trails, and the feeling there. Look at how much of our city expenditures could be eliminated by volunteers. And we would all rather give our time and feel good inside than give the money we don't have. I feel like it's being stolen from us instead of volunteering and giving of ourselves.
Thank you, Terry.
Behind me this time?
You may never get to come, Seth.
My name is Seth Wright. I live at 3413 South 100 East. And thank you very much for holding this Truth and Taxation meeting during an election year, no less. Maintaining public trust while making these kinds of tough choices is a really tall order, and it requires explaining things in a way that shows leadership and not politics, as I was reminded of recently. And in my view, this demonstrates some fundamental public service values of honesty, trust, transparency, integrity, and accountability. Retired State Senator Howard Stevenson said something like, officials said after taxpayers showed up with pitchforks and hanging rope, they would rather run across the state naked than go through truth and taxation again. In 2019, during a meeting very similar to this, discussing a proposed property tax increase, there appeared to be consensus between city staff and the city council to hold these types of meetings annually, even when the council votes to not raise taxes. And my question is, will the council consider holding these types of meetings, a kind of truth and taxation type meeting annually, even in election cycle years? And I don't suggest this is an alternative to running across the state naked annually, but rather a continuation of this kind of tax transparency by engaging everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth.
Okay, Alex Densley, 443 Jerry Drive. I always like quotes, so I'd like to start this off with a quote. The quote comes from C.S. Lewis, because, as you guys know, I'm kind of a regular. Ran for city council 4 years ago, been here through all kinds of fun conversations in this room. So the quote starts from C.S. Lewis, and it says, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." Over the past 5 years, I've been in here with many meetings over all kinds of interesting subjects, some very heated, some very not heated, and everything in between. Some of the projects that we have done were put up on the board for us. I was very appreciative of that, showing what we kind of had. City Hall renovation, downtown plaza, cemetery purchase, Creekside Park, and all the other fun ones, et cetera, that we have done through the years. Now, I took the opportunity, and I will let everybody know, Tyson Beck is one of the most friendliest people you will ever meet. I took him up on meeting in his office Monday, and that's how you guys ended up with that slide on Monday night, I believe, with the $8 million when we were playing with the Excel sheet, because I was like, well, where's the $8 million in this sheet? So I understand what we've done, and what we have learned in the last 5 years is that the city has spent quite a bit of money. This building itself was an $8.1 million renovation on it. Our downtown plaza, around $10 million, some of that had RDA, I understand that. Creekside Park and the additional things on it. What I want to do is go back to the very beginning, though, of what C.S. Lewis said then again. You can't go back and change the beginning, so we can't go back and bring back all the money that we've spent in the capital fund projects for all the buildings and Creekside Parks and things that we have done, but you can start with where you are and change the ending, which is where I would like to kind of take this on it. I was watching that Monday night broadcast with my 3-year-old running around as you guys were discussing, and Tyson Beck was up on there. And Kate Bradshaw brought up a very interesting example of her own home, of how she purchased her own home. They never finished the basement. Things and projects come up throughout the thing, and listen to the rest of the council on how they were very appreciative of previous past councils of very much pay as you go. As we function as a city, to which I am very grateful as well. In my opportunity to meet with Tyson Beck, I learned that we hadn't issued the bond yet. So us as taxpayers and entities, we haven't seen that increase on our property taxes there for the bond. Well, not a property tax increase, but the increase for the bond itself yet has not hit us because we have not issued the bond. Going along with the council that was in full agreement of, hey, we like pay as we go. This is why we want this tax increase, is so we can continue this pay as we go. I go back to C.S. Lewis's quote again, but you can start where you are and change the ending. I would encourage the council to not issue that bond. As I watched through your Monday evening meeting, that we are very much a pay-as-we-go entity. And going back to the quote from 1991, we want to be a pay-as-we-go entity. If we can purchase the Washington Elementary property with the funds that we have, which, according to Tyson Beck, we have the funds in there, we're still, even if we spent it, you're still at like $18 million. Then pay as we go to complete that property. The only reason that I bring this up is just to continue the long-standing tradition of Bountiful City as a pay-as-you-go entity. I know that we've already spent the money on our properties and things that we've done now. We can't go back and pull that money back out, but we can change our future. We can change our ending with this, and the only thing that I can see us being able to do is not issue that bond and pay as we go with these forward projects as we continue on. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Please.
Hi, Council. My name is Shehan Jaro. I am.
Would you give us that one more time?
Shehan Jaro, 1029 Beverly Way. I also had the opportunity to look at some of the models with one of you. Hi, Tyson. Tyson was friendly enough to show us some of the models that are informing this decision right now. And to me, it's an interpretation of trend. It's just as easy as that. So let me tell you what I think. Right now, we're trending our fund balance based off of about $4.5 million of CIP spending, capital project spending. And that $4.5 million is being derived from outlier years. We have a $10 million spent in 2011, transferred to enterprise fund to pay off a bond. We have these couple of years where we've spent a lot of money on CIP. If you add those up, yeah, we're going to be at a higher average per year, 4.5 million. If we don't, and we saw this in the trend, we're at about $3 million a year, which is what you guys, as a council, have signed up for in our budget. The capital improvement project 10-year plan says $7 million this year, $3 million next year, or $7 million next year, $3 million the year after, $3 million, 1.9, 1.5, right? So if you're trending at 4.5 million, then you're already admitting that you're going to be about $6 million over what you've already planned for in your budget, what your tentative budget already says, which that's something you're going to have to reconcile. As a council, why did you pass a budget and now say, hey, we need a property tax increase because we goofed on the budget? And I'm glad you guys had that slide with comparative cities. I'm assuming, let's say Lehigh is a comparative city, pay-as-you-go city. Lehigh has about a similar balance as us, right? 29 million or so in the capital projects fund. Lehigh has a general fund revenue of $77 million. So their capital projects fund balance represents about 37% of their general revenue, annual general revenue, general fund revenue. Ours is 24 million. And we have a general fund or CIP balance of 29 million, which represents 120% of general fund revenue. This tells me, thank you, Melinda. This tells me that we shouldn't be afraid to wait and see what trend line we are on. Are we at $3.5 million a year? Or are we really at $4.5 million? We have time. We have the luxury of that fund balance. We have the luxury of time to wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, council members, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, share with you some ideas relative to the budget. The open house meeting I thought was very helpful. Have some suggestions in the future for any kind of revenue things you're talking about to improve the input from residents. We're stakeholders.
Name.
Steve Haddon. I live at 1821 South Oakmont Drive.
Thanks, Steve.
We're your stakeholders. And I know sometimes that's hard when each of us lives in our individual house to figure out, even sometimes, what our neighbor next door needs, wants, is running into. And I think it's even harder when it's an institution like a city or whatnot. But I've attended several of these things, and I have several ideas. When I was raised, I was taught if you don't agree with something, you better come up with solutions, because otherwise keep your mouth shut. So I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to share some ideas with you on if you need this increase, on what I think would improve it. Number one, you've mentioned the 3 employees. Again, I'll second what another person said in terms of parks. I worked on grounds before as a seasonal. You have 2 full-time FTEs listed that are going to need not just a salary, but benefits, retirement, medical. Seasonals can do the job, and they don't cost the retirement, and they don't cost the other kinds of benefits. And they can do an excellent job under good leadership of the employees that you currently do employ full-time. Been there, done that. And thanks to good leadership as a seasonal, we did a good job in our crew. Number 2, you mentioned a full-time IT person. You already have IT people. For special projects and whatnot in IT, why not outsource that? Again, no FTE, no benefits, no retirement, pay as you go. You pay for those special projects if they're necessary for those IT people. Number 2, on your reserve, the pay as you go. I mean, I agree with that. I have a new slogan for you. Slow to go. Slow to go. there's been these big expenditures that you've done, and they are nice, and they're very expensive. Slow to go. Don't do more capital expenditures until the monies build themselves up. Now, there may be capital expenditures that happen that weren't planned on, a catastrophe or something. That's fine. But as far as the niceties and things like that, to eliminate this need for a 36% increase, slow to go. Keeping up with inflation, two things. It's already been mentioned. Inflation goes up, and I've never seen it go down. We've all worked, I'll just take maybe 30 more seconds. We've all worked in jobs where sometimes, as an employer, you can't pay inflation to your employees. You've been an employee who can't get a pay increase because of inflation. We've all been there, and that's been mentioned. There's a second thing I'd mention that goes with the truth in taxation. This was very timely. This morning, the state auditor, McDougall, was on a talk show and talked about truth in taxation. If I quote him correctly, and I hope I am, the whole idea of truth in taxation is to keep taxing entities from inheriting a windfall from inflation. So that applies to property taxes. I think to a certain degree it also applies here in terms of what increases we may need in our city to make things and keep things going. I will point out, as kind of almost ending up here, that on your May 11th document on the intent from, for these meetings, the intent was that incremental increases are better than one large tax increase. That's coming from your own May 11th document. You proposed 3 different models. One of those was this great big thing, and there were other ones that weren't. The final thing that I would really like to finish with is just to say to you, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I hope it makes a change. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But what I would suggest, you've spent a lot of staff time on this. There's no question. It's very polished. The one thing that I see missing, and again in your intent statement, you see going to city employees and looking at what their needs are per year. What I would recommend is in terms of any tax increase meeting in the future, that it won't be just one meeting, that as the budget is being looked at, not just during city council meetings, you have specific meetings, 2 or 3, through that year that you're going to be looking at increasing taxes, where it's solely to get input, share with the public, and get input from us as your stakeholders so you get a better feel for where we're coming from, and it helps you make a better decision in regard to that. I think that'd be a real important change in how things go, rather than waiting until the last minute. Thank you for your time. Sorry for the overrun. I love living in Bountiful. Been here a number of years and hope to continue.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve.
My name is Deborah Brown. I live at 33 East, 2750 South. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm 67 years old. I want to retire. I was planning on it this year. I've lived here a long time, and I'm seeing that I'm probably going to need to continue to supplement our income. My husband has very high health costs, and we would like to live here. And so I'm not sure what the demographics are. Maybe Scott might know in our neighborhood of the amount of people who are senior citizens in this city. That, in my opinion, needs to have strong bearing on your decision-making. Secondly, I'd like to thank the people who have mentioned volunteering. I think that that is something else that we are very good at in Bountiful and the entire state of Utah. Third, I'm wondering if you can answer a question just right now. Someone who has spoken here tonight previously, are they allowed to speak again?
We usually just do it once.
Oh, just once. Okay. The reason I asked is because I would like to hear more of what Tom Hardy had to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Collister, live at 2175 Carolyn Way. And I would echo and go back and say again, I would like to hear more from Mr. Tom Hardy as well. I've been a resident of Bountiful since I was 12. My wife and I have made our home here for the last 35 years. And what I haven't heard is a list of the revenue streams that you've looked at. If it were nothing more than a footnote in your binder, by the way, we looked at all of these revenue streams. When a company comes up short on cash and needs to help its bottom line, it just can't go out and raise taxes on its customers. A company has to get creative, and we've heard a lot of creative solutions, seasonal workers, so forth and so forth. But the revenue streams are almost endless. I've never been in your position. I know it's got to be hard, but there's got to be an awful lot of revenue streams. If it, like I said, if it were just a footnote, just say, we've looked at this, we've looked at this, we've looked at this, we've looked at that. That's all you has to have. So you can say, you have exhausted all possibilities. That's what a company has to do to stay afloat and to respond to their stockholders. Their stockholders, they want to know that the company has really bent over backwards to look at every possibility. Again, even if it's just a footnote, so that if someone has the question, they can say, we've checked it off. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure we write that down.
Hello, Lauren Carlson, 1163 East, 1900 South. So as my job, I go into low-income families and teach nutrition. Most of them are in apartments. They are dying with their rent. As someone who owns a couple condos that rent to people, my husband and I are not making a good return. People are going to have to up the rent, and it's going to hurt those who really cannot afford it.
Thank you. Others, please.
My name's Scott Freckleton. I live at 510 East, 2050 South, and I've lived in Bountiful for most of my 65 years. Just a couple of questions I had. I read in the management discussion analysis, I know that the budget, the unrestricted fund balance was like $30-something million or something like that. But in here, it shows that there's $87 million in unrestricted fund balance. I'm not sure why there's a difference there. That was in your June 30th, 2020 report. I don't think anything's mentioned of the CARES Act. I know Bountiful received about $3.2 million in excess funds to cover reduction of revenue, which I'm not sure how that got spent or if it was even I'm sure it was accounted for, but where it fell into all this budgeting. I mean, that's $3.2 million that they weren't expecting. I know I currently work for a city. I know our sales tax revenue has increased more so than what we had budgeted, which was a surprise. I think most people, I know in Mr. Hardy's letter, it's projected that over the next 5 years, the Capital Projects Fund will have a $30 million increase in revenue, in other words, in unrestricted funds. So this $950,000 we're proposing, I'm just curious how much we would have, how much excess revenue do we have this year, and would that have covered that? In other words, instead of putting $3 million more in for projects, or I get this as you go, pay as you go thing, but we don't even know what we're going to pay for. We just know that someday we're going to have to pay for something. We don't know what it is. And so to have this just sitting there, and I guess because of the pandemic and all that, I guess I'm speaking on behalf of my mother and others who are in a fixed income situation. I'm not sure this is the right time to do this. I get that we probably need to do it, but perhaps maybe this year is not the right time. A lot of people are affected by, their income has gone down, their fixed incomes, and we're proposing, even though it looks small, it adds up big time, and I think it puts them in a very precarious and difficult situation. And I really don't want my mom moving in with me. Anyway, don't tell her that. I know you're in her ward. But anyway, I appreciate how this has been presented. I think it's been very professional and very educational. I get how all this stuff works. I guess my feeling is this is not the year to do it. Anyway, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Freckleton. Next. Oh, good. Court, you almost, yeah, good.
Hi, my name is Court DeLost. I live at 310 South, 750 East in Bountiful. And I'd like just, I know if you don't want to, we don't want people to duplicate what other people said, but I really I want to focus on the seniors. My mother shell-shocked when she saw her tax bill. And I know it's not just you guys, but the rates for the school district and the fire just lit her on fire. So I just want to have you guys be cognizant of that, just like say this probably isn't the year to do this. Also, I'd like to have you take a look at the expenditures. We've had some great projects for a lot of people that enjoy the parks, recreation, but I'd like to ask out here, how many of you have been to the new parks or city center recreation? Raise your hand. So we've got a good representation, but there's a lot of people that have had their tax money spent on something they're never going to use. So it's time to maybe put the brakes on some of these wonderful projects we're doing and start focusing on police protection, especially when it came to a head the other night with the shooting that occurred, and there was a shooting about a month ago. It's time to put some money into policing. Thank you.
Thanks, Court. Bob. Hey, by the way, I failed to acknowledge Bob with last night's primary and how hard he worked and how good he did. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Mayor. Bob Lindsay at 3187 South, 200 East. I feel an obligation to stand here and say a few comments on behalf of those voters. But I'll first start by saying that I've lived here in Bountiful my whole life. There's a small home over there on 4th East next to the flourishing Baptist church where I was baptized. Of course, back then it was the 3rd Ward. And I grew up here in the city and watched my dad frugally build a home. And we ate out of our garden because that's the way that Dad lived. I remember going to my dad one time because he was so frugal on the budget that I took him my 11 cents savings because it's all I had, but he was so concerned over being able to make the budget meet that he actually laughed when I told him that I wanted to give him this 11 cents because I was listening to him complain all the time about the budget and being able to balance it. My father-in-law lived here in this city his whole life and worked 3 jobs to build a home. We pinch pennies, we work multiple jobs, build a great city, and what a heritage. And I look at these folks here to represent them, and that's one of the reasons I ran. So back to the comments here to add something new. In my profession, I work for the Department of Defense, and when we have a zero-sum game when it comes to spending money as well. When we look across our budgets, we can't have an increase at all until we first go back and look at every account and have an impact statement. We have to turn in and say, what happens if your budget is cut by 10%? Tell us how it hurts you. And then you have to be able to balance those off. If you don't look at your budgets to say, how much pain is it to really cut 10% in each one of your budgets? Not that you're going to do it, but it's an exercise to allow you to know whether or not you actually need the increase there. Where can you look across the entire budget? I don't think we've done a good job here looking across the whole budget. And one of the things that's missing, and the reason I stood here tonight that's missing, can you please comment on the relationship with the redevelopment agency funds to the capital budget and comment whether or not there's been exfers or transfers budgets between the RDA funds and the relationship to the capital fund. And the last comment is, you know, maybe if you take a second look at it, the new park that we're building, which we all approve, we love it, but can you do it for $7 million? Because if you do, then you've solved your problem right there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else? All right, with that, okay, please.
My name is Ron Brown. I live at 33 East, 2750 South in Bountiful. I have a question for our good, hardworking police officer. At any given time, how many guys are on shift, night shift? That's a tough one, I know.
Not necessarily tough. Graveyard shift?
Yeah.
3 to 5.
3 to 5 police officers, and they do a fine job, and I appreciate your hard work. At 4:15, I think Monday morning, there was a shooting down the street from my house, about 7 floors down. Somebody was trying to break into a car. The resident decided to go out there and try and stop him, got shot in the leg. He's doing okay as far as I know. But I'm kind of looking at maybe we want to look at more law enforcement instead of more guys pulling weeds. You know, I do appreciate the beautiful parks that we have and how Bountiful looks. But that's something to consider, people coming in to our neighborhoods from outside and breaking into homes. We have kind of a neighborhood watch thing, and we know about when these things happen. And I'd like to see more law enforcement and their budget increased. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Claudia Lindeberg, 2057 Pemmon Lane. Sounds to me like we really don't need that park that we want to spend all that money on, and maybe we should spend it on the police. I also know that our city manager makes over $245,000, and the assistant that he has makes over $100,000. Sounds like a lot of money to me.
Okay, with that, I will, if there's no other people, I will close the public hearing. And I would say thank you to all of you. It does take some courage and some bravery to come and stand before all of those of you who are out there, plus the staff and the council. So thank you for all of your comments, and they've been noted, and we'll try to answer as many of them as you can. You know, I think I'm the oldest on the council and the staff here, so I get the fixed income deal, and I'm kind of there, so I feel that pain. I'm going to turn time now over to Gary.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll try and address these questions, probably not in order.
Hey, Gary, how about if I do this first? How about if we take just a little break for about till the top of the hour, for those who may need to go to the restroom, for those who may need whatever cause. Okay, could we do that just for a few moments? Thanks. Again, thank you all for assembling again, and we'll turn time over to Gary, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, this may be a little bit out of order, but we hope we get to a few things. I may start with some of the easier ones first. Tyson, could you talk about the difference between the unrestricted fund balance of $87 million in all funds versus the capital projects fund, and why, for example, we just can't transfer money back and forth?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So if you do take the city's financial statements and you look at the city as a whole, the city as a whole is the 87, was it 87 million that was referenced?
That's what was quoted, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I would have to actually pull up my financial statement in order to give the exact number, but that's the roundabout number of the city as a whole. So there are various departments within the city, and there's various uses for that 87 million. So, for instance, Light and Power has its own portion of that 87 million. The general fund has its portion, the capital projects fund has its portion. Each department has its own cash and investments. So if you're looking at the city as a whole, yes, there as a whole that is true. But each fund, each department it has its own cash and investments and needs to be used for that department's operations. So for the most part, our enterprise funds, you cannot transfer the money to another department without going through a public process, a public hearing process, a public notice process. So again, the designations of where that 87 million is allocated is based off department and function. And there are also very restricted uses on many of our funds. So for instance, our perpetual care fund is set aside specifically to pay for the closure of our cemetery and to maintain the cemetery in perpetuity after all of the lots have been sold. Again, our landfill fund has a landfill closure money set aside that is restricted exclusively to close the landfill and maintain that landfill in perpetuity, the closure and the capping and the monitoring. So again, when we're looking at the city as a whole, that's that grand total number. When we're looking at the capital projects fund specifically, we're talking about tax dollars and the savings of our tax dollars to go for our capital projects such as parks and street plowing and streets and all of those types of infrastructure projects. And so the capital projects fund is exclusive to those types of projects. Gary, anything to add on that one?
Maybe just a quick clarification so the city has, these different funds. It's called fund accounting. Some are paid for with fees, like the power fund. Another example is the golf fund. There are no taxpayer dollars that go to support the golf course at all. No taxpayer dollars that go to support the capital project or the operations of the power fund or the water fund. Those are all paid for by fees. Each one of those funds has its own balance. And that balance is used for the capital replacement for those particular uses. The CARES Act was mentioned. The city did receive about $3.2 million for CARES Act. It was pointed out in federal law that specifically could not be used for revenue replacement. The way the city used those funds was we provided Davis County with money that they distributed as grants to small businesses. We had a small amount in reserve to help people with utility payment issues during the pandemic. We shared some of that revenue with the fire district, who did not receive any CARES Act, and then the majority of it was used to pay for police and first responder salaries. Let's see, the RDA and capital projects funds, if there are any transfers between the two, the answer is no. RDA funds can only be used for RDA purposes. When we renewed the RDA for 20 years, we had to have the approval of other taxing entities, and we had to specify in broad categories how we would spend that money. So those two funds don't intermingle at all.
Hey, Gary, maybe that they have to be used in very specific areas as well.
Yeah, it either has to be used within the RDA or for the benefit of the RDA.
The RDA, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'll mention my salary. I wish it was $240,000. That would be awesome, but it's not. It's public record. I actually make about $180,000. The other money is benefits and retirement and things like that. I hope I'm worth it. I try really hard every day to be worth it. So let's see. Revenue streams. The question was asked about examining all of our revenue streams in our general fund. The general fund of the city, which provides for the general tax type supported services, which would be streets, plowing, police, those kinds of services that we're talking about today, is funded by property tax, franchise taxes, sales tax. Those are the primary three revenue sources, and then some fees like building permit fees and things like that. The only one of those revenue streams that we really control that's substantial is property tax. Sales tax rates are set by the state. We can't impose a new sales tax. We can't increase a sales tax rate to generate more money. Franchise tax rates are also set by the state. We can't impose, we've imposed all that are available. We can't impose more. We can't increase the rate. Fees have to be proportional to the service that's charged. So the only revenue source that really is under the control of the city is the property tax when it comes to the general fund. And it's worth pointing out that the sales tax is the only revenue source that grows with inflation. Everything else is, as we've pointed out, is static. So that's the only revenue source that grows, which leads to a couple of other questions with the sales tax. We use our sales tax, we divide it between ongoing operations, so salaries, maintenance for roads and things like that, and we put the other portion of it in the capital projects fund, which is our savings account to pay for, that we save up for to pay for major replacements like roads and buildings and things like that, police vehicles, et cetera. So this raises a few different issues. Mr. Hardy pointed out that our sales tax grew 67% since 2013, I think. That's actually not correct. Our sales tax proportion in the general fund grew by 67%, but that means we allocated less to the capital projects fund in that period of time. We actually only grew 24%, it's about 3% per year between 2013 and now. So. No, that is actually accurate, and I don't think we need to argue.
Numbers out of your budget, but I didn't make those up. Those are your numbers in your budget. Look at page 4 in your 2013-2014 budget, and look at page 4 again in your 2021-22 budget. Those are the numbers: $6 million and $10 million.
Hey, Tom?
It's okay. We're just going to agree to disagree on that.
Please
and that's okay.
Please, Tom.
Okay, we can talk after. That's fine. But
Talk after.
But I am disagreeing with you.
Yeah. Please, Gary, if you would proceed with answering the questions, please.
Yeah, I will. So
Thank you.
We have not actually seen a 67% increase in sales tax over that period of time. It's been 24% increase in sales tax over that period of time. Well, on that point, Tyson, would you talk a little bit about, or Galen, could you address the issue of, let's see, the tentative, or excuse me, where we would be if we include the fire district in our property tax rate?
I can go ahead and handle that, Gary. The slide, if you remember when we were going through the slides, had two separate slides. One was for just the city's rate and compared with the other cities. And then there was a second slide that had that same set of figures in it, but a separate column that include comparative rates. And I mentioned at that time that that includes the city's rates in the left-hand column. The comparative rate includes all those cities' rates, plus if those cities had a fire district, a recreation district, or something that was like an irrigation district, something like that was unique to their community, just so we could make our rates as comparative and say, we'll just make sure we fully load that rate, if you will. So the rate you're paying, you can take a look at how that would compare if you were in Layton, for instance, or if you were in Farmington or North Salt Lake. And so we were comparing that rate. That was the rate where the first set of slides where it was just the city rate, we were the lowest. When you compared it with the comparative rates added to it, which included the fire district, we were the third from the lowest. So it did move us from the lowest rate to the third to the lowest rate when you add all the other taxing districts into it. So.
And that doesn't include what happened last night?
So
no, because we, go ahead.
I'm just going to go on.
Please.
So one of the other questions that was asked was, sorry, I need to find it on my notes here. This had to do with the bond and how that relates to the property tax increase, and if there was a discussion about fund balance and declining fund balance. And the the majority of the conversation at the beginning about the decision whether or not to buy Washington Park was all about the fund balance. It was when the school decided to close the property, excuse me, when the school districts decided to close the school, they reached out to the city and offered us the first opportunity to buy the property. We were then left with a decision as a city: do we use fund reserves to purchase that property and improve it, or do we ask voters if they would decide or desire to tax themselves to buy it? The decision that was made was that it would have taken our fund balance too low, below the policy that the council had set. And so to ask the voters, if the voters wanted to tax themselves to buy the property and improve it, then that would be the will of the people. If not, the city probably wouldn't have bought the property. So voters were asked, they approved the bond 60-40, and so those revenues that will be generated, it's an $8 million bond, 3.5 is used to purchase the property, 2.5 is set aside to improve the property, and additional $2 million is included in the bond for the trails program, to build trails in the city. That money can only be used for that purpose. So even if we only spent $7 million on the bonds, on the project, we couldn't take the voter-approved bond proceeds and plug them into our capital projects fund. They can only be used for the purpose that the voters approved. And so there won't be any commingling of those funds. We can't do that. Let's see. Question about why the city didn't make an adjustment to property taxes over time. I wasn't here for that whole period of time. I think one reason was pointed out that truth in taxation is really painful. You know, you hold a meeting like this, and it's very difficult. I think our council would say, and you may hear them say this, that it's probably intended to be difficult. It shouldn't be pleasant. I don't think there's a person here that enjoys this process or wants to see property taxes increased. Nevertheless, it's sometimes necessary. I think in retrospect, my personal recommendation is, should we have over time done this slowly? Yes. But it didn't happen, and so we're acting now. And the council will have their own opinions about that, but that's my personal opinion.
And Gary, could I just add on to that same line? There was a question also about the negative financial trends that we've been seeing and why action has not been taken on those negative financial trends until now. And I will say that we are constantly looking at the reserves of the city, the fund balances of the city, our revenue streams, our expenditures, and we are analyzing those things annually. And if, in fact, we felt that there are needed corrections, that is taken into consideration. That with these specific instances, what our main concern is that we have had a lot of large and infrequent capital projects of late. That is draining our capital reserves, our capital savings, but we don't have the ability to replenish those reserves. As we discussed, we have 14 years of history showing that our revenue in is less than our expenditures out. And so we're not able to, again, replenish our funds, and so again, we have to make the corrective action. The city is not in a bad financial position, but we do need to make a correction in order to continue to operate as a pay-as-you-go entity.
And I think that raises the question that was asked as to timing, and the council may be better able to answer this than I can when we get to their point, but I think in speaking for them, part of the reason for the timing now is that there is a recognized need that to not harm ourselves financially by going below a council set level of fund reserves, that there needs to be an adjustment. Could it be done over years, and could we delay it? Certainly. But the current council can't bind future councils. And this was the council that made some of those decisions to increase things and some of the amenities in the community, and I think they feel an obligation to make sure that we have the money to be able to maintain them. That's the answer, unless the council feels differently. I think there's just one last one that I have on my list, and then Galen and Tyson, I'll look to you guys if there's anything else. A mention was made of the tentative budget with the letter from me to the city council that we presented a tentative budget that included the three new positions, and it was a balanced budget. that is accurate, but to balance the budget, we had to take essentially money from reserves to pay for it. The tentative budget by law is required to be given to council early in the process as a starting point, not a finishing point. What we presented to the council was a starting point that recognized that in order to pay for the additional positions and some of the other things, we'd have to deplete our reserves. Then over the course of a couple of months, the council and staff worked together, and the council determined that rather than depleting reserves, we would do a property tax increase. Tyson, Galen, anything else?
Maybe one that would combine a couple of different questions from two different individuals, but it's essentially the same answer. One individual asked about having an opportunity throughout the year to have input and to see what's going into the budget as it goes along, rather than just waiting to either May, where we adopt a tentative, or final, which is usually June, or now because of the tax increase in August. And then also what revenue streams we're looking at. I think Gary addressed the revenue stream aspect a little bit, but maybe I could talk about that in context of how the budget's put together. There are several opportunities throughout the year, starting usually in April, where public input can be part of the budget process, even before it gets to tentative adoption. We have, as I mentioned before to the mayor and council, that they had participated in April in 6 different committee settings, where each of the budgets of the city are reviewed with them. Those are publicly announced meetings that we at times have citizens come and hear what's discussed in there. Those budgets are gone through in detail at the line item level as what will be spent in those budgets. Slide presentations are given similar like what we've done here to outline various things. So for instance, the streets department shows areas where there might be street work being done. The power department talks about major capital improvements they're going to be doing, different substations that are being worked on, or whatever happens to be. Each of the departments talks through what they are requesting, and then the council has an opportunity to ask questions and make recommendations. So that is an opportunity in the April timeframe where the citizenry would have an opportunity to attend and be able to see what is going into the budget. And then again in May for the tentative adoption, and again in June or in August if there's a tax increase, so that you can have an opportunity to see what goes into that. And as far as what revenue streams are looked at, part of that process in those meetings is to go over what the staff has looked at. And during the council meetings that were held, our retreats with the council in January or February of every year, a couple of years ago, the council gave us direction as staff to bring back to them an analysis every year during the budget of what we are seeing with trends in revenues and what we're seeing going forward, what has happened in the past, and to let them know revenues and expenses where we're going to be, and then make recommendations to them about what we need to do to make adjustments there, whether it is a tax increase, which we might talk through with them, or if we need to make adjustments in programs or projects. And so we have those discussions as part of those meetings with the council, which even the retreat is open to the public and is an announced meeting as well, just like this meeting was tonight. So those are opportunities where we go through and discuss the individual revenue sources. We'll go through at the line item detail and say, we are going to be, we think, here with property tax, here with sales tax, business license fees, or whatever it happens to be. And each of the funds of the city that are not tax supported, that are fee supported, do a similar exercise with the council, talking about power rates or water rates or whatever it happens to be. So there's opportunity for citizen input and scrutiny there, as well as to see what things take place at the ground level before we arrive where we're at today.
So Mayor and Council, I think it's now time for discussion for you all. Are there questions that you have for staff that we can address?
I would like to, first of all, I think from our senior council person,
Do you
I
mind?
would like to hear from Richard.
Do you mind, just before we go to Richard, I just have a quick question that someone brought up that I was hoping you could address. The seasonal or volunteers, and why or why not that may work.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us of that one. Anybody who's an employer right now understands how challenging it is to find any seasonal employees. it's been increasingly difficult to find seasonal employees for parks for a number of years. Bountiful for many years relied on that crop of young men and young women that would come and work in our parks seasonally before they would leave on their missions. When that age changed to 18 and 19, it dramatically reduced our hiring pool. And so it's been very challenging since then. Another thing that we have noticed as far as why seasonal employees why we can't just plug the hole that we're talking about with seasonal employees in our parks department is there's a significant amount of work that has to take place in the spring and in the fall to prepare the property so that we aren't dealing with weeds and broken limbs and things like that through the rest of the year. And we can't hire people when school's in. We just can't find enough temporary employees. We've had temporary employees, part-time employee positions opened year-round for 2 years now, and we can't fill the positions. That's in part why. And volunteers, it sounds like a great idea, but finding somebody that will volunteer and come down on a schedule every day for 4 hours a week just isn't practical. You can't find that many people to volunteer on a regular basis. People are wonderful, especially in Bountiful, to volunteer for big projects, one-time projects, but trying to staff around a volunteer workforce, I guess I would just say this, if it was possible, it would have been done before, and it's just not realistic.
Thanks, Gary. So I'll turn some time over, if you would, Richard. I think Richard being the senior member of our city council, I think it would be appropriate to hear from you first, please.
Mayor, could I answer one question first?
Please. No, you're
make any
just
comments?
fine.
This gentleman here asked about the $4.5 million that's used as the standard in our budget going forward. And you pointed out that our future budget doesn't include $4.5 million budgeted in most years that we currently have on our 10-year capital plan. And we found, looking back in a couple of decades, that looking back on what our capital expenditures have been is a more accurate predictor for us necessarily than looking forward. Just because there's been a couple of times in the city's recent history where some significant unplanned emergencies have arisen that have significantly depleted those accounts. So that's why that number is used. We sincerely hope that it isn't $4.5 million a year. But even though there are statistical outliers that skew that number up in that sample, you also know that there are 2 years that lie significantly below that number. So there's a reason for it. It's been looked at. There's been a discussion on policy and philosophy on how we can best predict what those numbers are going to be going forward. And we decided that looking at our history is a better predictor of what emergencies might lie out there than just counting the projects that we're planning on. So thanks for that question. Was that an okay answer? Okay. I was just copying what Gary said, so I hope it's okay. Folks, I've been on the council 14 of the last 18 years, and I want to answer a couple of questions about why taxes haven't been raised incrementally over those times. And it's partly because of the fact that these meetings are painful. It's partly because of the fact that you have elected people that don't want to raise property taxes, period. Somebody said earlier that property taxes are immoral. And I won't say that they're immoral, but property taxes really hurt us. And it's like we don't even own our property anymore. We're renting. So I want you to understand that the policy of the city in not raising property taxes, or the practice of not raising property taxes over the years, is because we are like you. We're your neighbors. We don't like paying property taxes either. And we feel the pain that's inflicted every time government does something like that. I want to acknowledge that even little moves by government can be oppressive to people, especially people that are living on fixed incomes, like my 81-year-old parents who live on 4th North. It's a significant thing for us. And when we talk about whether or not this is the right year to do this, only one time in the last 20 years have we raised property taxes, and that was specifically for what some of you mentioned tonight. That was to hire more law enforcement. Because having a safe public is one of our highest priorities, if not our highest priority. It's sad that things are nice enough here that folks are coming in from out of town to do crime. We wish they wouldn't. The chief wishes they wouldn't. It's not something that we can prevent them doing, but we can police enough and prosecute enough that hopefully it becomes a deterrent, or it is a deterrent. I want to comment as well on the reserves policy. I know, and before I was elected to the council so many years ago, I thought the same thing. At that time, I thought Tom Hardy had a big pot of money that he was sitting on, and it seemed wrong. And then I got elected to the council, and I got familiarized with the budget, first under Tom, who, by the way, is one of the great city managers Utah has seen. And I'll say again, Gary Hill is additionally one of the great city managers that Utah has seen. I've seen both of them interact with the Utah League of Cities and Towns as free consultants to other municipalities. These two gentlemen know what they're talking about, and they're awesome. So the fact that more of you wanted to hear more from Tom tonight's understandable, but hearing from Gary Hill was important as well. Anyway, back to the point of these reserves. It seems like the city is just sitting on a pot of money and that it's just costing you. It's not the case. The fact that the city has those reserves and can pay cash for the things the city needs and not have to bond for them keeps us, first of all, from paying interest, second of all, from paying the origination fees or the processing fees that are associated with bonding, all sorts of studies that have to be paid for in order to bond. It saves us money 17 different ways for us to be able to have those reserves on hand, pay cash for things as they come up, especially those emergencies. So I really hope that we can see tonight that if we decide to raise taxes tonight, it's not because we think that you guys are just endless bags of money and that we should tax you as much as we can get away with. It's because we know that you and I and everybody else that lives in Bountiful is going to pay less over time if we have those reserves in the bank ready for those emergencies and ready for those projects than if we deplete those reserves, which, by the way, this balanced budget does. It was depleting significantly from our reserve fund. We're going to pay less. We're going to save money over time. There's a reason Bountiful gets recognized statewide. There's a reason Bountiful gets recognized in the county as one of the cities with the lowest taxes and fees, because it's intentional. Because we are like you, we don't want to pay any more than we have to pay. And if we are going to pay, it makes sense for us to pay a lower amount than a higher amount, which is what we're going to do if we go out to bond. So that's what I would say first of all. One other small comment. There's been a lot of projects done in the city since I came here, from a new water department building years ago, a new water treatment facility that we just completed a few years ago, a twin natural gas turbine generation facility at the power department that keeps us out of the power market during hot summer afternoons when power rates go crazy. Again, all projects that over time save us significant money. Now, no mayor has ever tried to talk me into doing a project that wasn't sound for Bountiful. And I don't remember any votes by the council that have had contrary votes to any of the projects that we've done either. But I do remember a lot of discussions over the years where our city managers, both old and new, have cautioned us that if we don't keep our reserves healthy by raising property taxes periodically, the city's not going to be in as good a financial position, and our residents are going to end up paying more. So as we approach the vote tonight, all of the council members that are sitting here with me today and council members that have sat up here in the past understand that with those projects and with those expenditures comes a responsibility to keep the city whole and to keep the city healthy so that all of us can pay less over time. That's what I have to say, Mayor. And thank you. Thanks so much for being here and caring and participating. That's a big deal. I wish there were more people here. So thanks so much.
Millie.
Still thinking.
Okay. Would you like to go next, Kendall?
Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate that you guys care enough to be here. So we've been discussing this for months. Our finance team is one of the best. I want to thank them personally for the work they've put in, the months they've put in. And, you know, we've gotten hate emails, you guys are crooks, we've heard it all, but I just have to tell you, the team here at Bountiful City is a professional, and appreciate their work and respect what they do. My colleagues have done their homework. They've been poring over these numbers for months. I've talked to dozens of finance professionals about these policies, and the information that I've learned from talking to all these finance professionals is all over the board. There's not really like one golden answer, right? There's different opinions of what could be done. Reasonable people may disagree and have different conclusions. So I've been hearing from a lot of retirees that are on fixed incomes as we've heard tonight. I've heard from businesses who don't have the residential exemption. I said I would not raise property taxes one more penny than needed. And I think that there are some things that are nice to have as opposed to need to have. I'm just going to give you a little example. This blouse I'm wearing, I bought it 24 years ago. It was when we were newlyweds, we had a gift certificate to ZCMI for our wedding. And so we went there, and it's something that it's not the newest blouse anymore in my closet, but I make do. I've had it for 24 years. And I think Bountiful City, in a lot of ways, has done that. We've made do, and we try our best to we comb through the budget every year in detail. This is not something that we would take lightly. When I think about what does our city really need, if we're weighing our wants and our needs, I do believe that we need 3 more employees. I've sat with the Parks Director, I've sat with the IT Director. If we think about what's going on, you probably heard about the breach in Clearfield with the security. We definitely want to protect our IT department and give them the tools that they need. There's private resident information with the IT department for things like utility billing. There's definitely, with 24 more acres in Parks Department, there's definitely a legitimate need for 2 more employees there. So when I think about what we actually need, I do think that we need 3 more Parks Department employees. What I would propose, I would like to see a lower property tax increase. I would like to propose a 15% as opposed to a 37%, where we cover the salaries of those 3 employees plus 3.75% for inflation, because the truth is, it does cost money to run a government, right? It's irresponsible to neglect pipes. As you know, you've heard the horror stories from Flint, Michigan about what happens when you ignore the infrastructure. So I would support a 15% increase for these needs that Bountiful has. When it comes to raising taxes for the reserves, I think it's very important that we have liquidity, that we have reserves. It's been talked about, you can burn through a lot of cash if you have a natural disaster. At the same time, if we had an emergency where we really needed funds, I know that the public would understand if at that time we had to raise taxes. And so I think that's something that we could do if the need arose. Also, when we're looking at the line that's showing the trajectory of what will happen over time, Tyson's the best there is when we're looking at that line, but he'll admit that it's a guess, especially the further out you get with that trajectory of where our savings is going. It's a guess, and what gets us closer to being real with those numbers as opposed to being a guess is that the closer we are, right? And so I think that if we're looking at 5 years out, 7 years out, it starts to get more blurry about what we really need versus what. And so, to me, if we have a trajectory that's kind of on autopilot, it's not. What's I think a little more helpful is to analyze it every year, where we really have better projections because we're closer to the actual dates that we're looking at. So the other thing that I would say is that when we're looking at that trajectory line, spending is a factor there. And so there are some things that we can control, right? The spending part of that trajectory is up to us. And sometimes there are emergencies that are unforeseen, that are not our choice. But sometimes there are projects that we can delay. because we don't need to actually spend that money now. So instead of spending that $1 million now, maybe we'll wait and spend it in 2 years when we have it. So these decisions should be considered annually. That's how we keep the best accurate numbers as we're looking at these kinds of charts, is by looking at the numbers every year and basing our decisions like this on what we need right now, as opposed to what we might need in the future. And so I would propose a 15% to cover the employees that we need and to cover a little bit for inflation, because those costs are real. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I will keep my comment short. My grandfather came from Denmark at the age of 12, landed in Perry, Utah, went to Brigham City, Utah, and became the mayor of Brigham City, Utah. I was reading his journal the other night, and one thing really jumped out at me. I was named after him. In his journal, he said this: "We had a very difficult meeting last night. We had to raise taxes." That really struck me. I know everyone sitting on the council right now knows this is a very difficult thing. And anyone on a council or any mayor knows this is a difficult thing. We spent time, I'll borrow this from Kate. This is the budget booklet for this city. Each city council member will sit and go through this budget page by page and ask questions of the staff. Is this necessary? Is this necessary? Can we cut this? Can we cut that? So your city council has looked hard at this. I feel good about what is happening. It's hard. I know it's hard. I'm a senior citizen myself. It's hard. But you elected us as council to look after the well-being of this city. And I feel it's our responsibility to make the hard decision and do what is right for the well-being of this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Kate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There were a few comments that were raised. There were questions / ideas / comments. And I thought I'd answer a few of those before giving some thoughts. One of the things that was raised was volunteers. And one of the residents tonight referenced some of the volunteer projects that I've been a part of, and there's some others here in the audience that have been a part of those projects. I have served less years on the council than my colleague at the other far end. But when you come to the council, you often come with a lot of passion and a lot of interest, some ideas, some that are new ideas, some that are old ideas you think we ought to retry. And volunteerism was something I was pretty passionate about. As an active resident before I was elected, I think I probably drove our city manager nuts with wanting to volunteer on different projects involving a dog park and using volunteers to help offset the cost so that we could make that happen. I've been happy to give of my time to the city when it's needed for windstorms or other emergencies. And I've been happy to work on projects to help cut some of those costs for the things that I'm passionate about. And the volunteers, they do turn out, and they can be an impressive workforce. There are some times, though, that volunteers come for the set amount of time they may have on a Saturday before it's time to go to soccer games or go to Costco or clean the house, and there's still work to be done on a project. And it struck me when that project was mentioned tonight. That Trails project, the last one we did, we had rented a chipper. The city had rented a chipper so that we could chip the branches that were being removed for the new Trails project. And it was hot, and it was dirty work. It was really noisy, and there were wood chips and dust everywhere. And at the end of that day, we started bleeding volunteers pretty fast because it was a really crappy job. And the last person standing on that project, they reached a point where there were about 4 or 5 of us left. Someone that's here in the audience that serves on our Trails Committee and on our Planning Commission was there with me. I stayed. Our Parks Director stayed, and 2 other members of the Trails Committee stayed. And the chipper overheated, and the radiator blew all over our Parks Director and one of the volunteers, and we had to wait and run water back and forth to get it cooled, to get it back. And one by one, we started looking at watches, knowing that we'd all promised spouses we'd be back in time for, you name the project, you name the game, you name the dance recital. And we started bailing, and it got pretty thin to where it was 2 volunteers and our Parks Director trying to get this chipper off the mountain, cooled down. There's a lot that can be done with volunteers. The people who don't get to leave on the Saturday, though, are those staff that stay. And I think there is absolutely room in all of our projects for more volunteers. But I've personally served alongside knowing that at the end of the day, we do need more staff in those parks departments because our Parks Director was on his day off for this particular project and left covered in sawdust from the chipper and the radiator fluid. I think the outfit he was wearing was probably a total loss from those things. Every one of the members of this council have put in a lot of time in the service of this city, a lot of time on the service on this budget. And a lot of it you may see, you may watch us on YouTube. Had a couple residents mention they watched the YouTube hearing on Monday night. There's a lot of times that you don't see us working on your behalf. I have not spent much of the last 3 days working on my day job. I've spent it working on this issue, in talking with my colleagues about trend lines, about our budget, about what we are asking from your pocketbooks, and was it fair and was it right? I hold down the younger end of the spectrum on the council, and there are many of our wonderful residents that I know from growing up here, but there are many I don't. And many of you asked and said you wanted to hear from our former city manager, a person who until last night I knew only by legend, as a person who was a significant player here in Bountiful. But I was a kid for most of his service, and unfortunately, these weren't the topics that occupied me in the early 90s because I was in junior high and high school and had other things on my mind. But I was happy to clear my schedule. He cleared his schedule so that we could spend 2.5 hours together last night. I'm not the only one that took the time to meet and hear from him. Several of the others did at great length. His wisdom is not dismissed. His voice is not unheard. He is a resident like the rest of you, which means that you all have a right to be here. He has a special perspective because of his years of service, and I want you to know that it was listened to, that it was heard, that it gave food for thought, it inspired new conversations and new questions among those that have served for many years and among those of us that have served for a much shorter amount of time. Some of you probably get a newsletter I write. It's not the be-all and end-all of communications in Bountiful. It's just a little thing I do. If you don't receive it and would like to, talk to me after. I'm happy to sign you up. I spend a lot of time in those newsletters describing what's happening, why they're happening, and offering my perspective, and it is only my perspective. In that newsletter that I sent out on Sunday that was solely on this topic, there was a quote I used in there that a resident of Bountiful, someone who's become a friend, had sent to me when I was first elected, that I thought was wise counsel. And it's a quote from Edmund Burke, who was a British member of Parliament, and it was a speech he gave to the people who had elected him. And in the speech, at the end, he said that a representative owes the people not just their industry, and I feel I have given you a lot of my industry on this topic and on others, but also one's judgment. And in spending significant hours and days and weeks, starting in January, the budget hearings, the subcommittee budget hearings in April, the tentative budget hearings, the one-on-one meetings, the responses to your emails, the people who have chosen to correspond on social media where I've engaged. We've spent time in the industry on your behalf, but at the end of the day, I have to apply my judgment. I have appreciated analysis of conservative models using historical trends. I've appreciated points of view that led to questions on models using forecasted revenues and forecasted trends, models that were more moderate in their reserve policies. I don't find that one is right and one is wrong, one is black and one is white. I find that they are all really good theories. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the two principles, pay-as-you-go and reserves. And for the two that dialed in on YouTube, they already got to hear, as Alex referenced, my basement story. That my husband is a teacher, and our budget will never be as big as the city budget by many zeros. And we apply this in our own home. It took us 3 summers to finish our basement. We paid for what we could each summer, and then we stopped. We did a lot of the work ourselves. We had lots of fights about the color of tile and flooring. Mostly it turned out the way I wanted. But not all of it. And I believe in applying those things to the city too. I believe in the reserve fund, in having planned capital improvements. In 2020, before we knew there was going to be a pandemic, we had planned to replace some carpet in our home. We had planned to buy a new dishwasher. What we did not plan for were 4 surgeries for yours truly, 3 based on a rather dumb injury, 1 as a result of a surprise cancer diagnosis that turned out to not be so fun. And then our hot water heater broke too. We had reserves, we were okay, we paid for them. And it's been my experience in 2020 that the crystal ball is pretty foggy. The magic 8 ball is definitely broken. I don't know what's coming, but I'm really glad we have reserves, just in case. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. And Millie.
Well, just like my colleagues, I'm grateful that there are so many people who are interested and who are being active participants in our city government, because it does take a lot of time, and this is hard. It's been hard ever since January. We've been talking about this for months, and there were discussions when I was first elected, which I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary in January of sitting on the city council. I have learned a lot in the last 6 months and year when it comes to our city budget. I will admit, just like Tyson, I probably came into this with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, thinking, oh, we can cut money here, we can cut money there. But our budget, as Councilman Simonson and Mr. Rasmussen have said, we go through this annually, line by line. And for anyone sitting on the council to suggest otherwise is incredibly disingenuous. This is something we look at annually. It is something that is analyzed, and those meetings are open. I wish all of those budget meetings were this well attended, because I agree the last thing any resident wants, myself included, is to feel blindsided. However, as stakeholders, we need to care not only when we're mad about something, but always, because you do keep us in check, and we do want to know what you have to say. And it seems like we get to a certain point where the research has been done and the decisions have been made, and then all of a sudden, people are up in arms when those discussions were open and welcome for everyone to come to from the beginning. Also, the comment of needs versus wants. It's a very wise comment, and I agree with that. However, it's also important to point out Councilman Higginson has been sitting on the council for 18 years? 14, excuse me.
Feels like 18.
Feels like 18.
22.
14 years, almost 2 years. Councilwoman Harris, 8 years. Councilman Simonson, 4 years. Councilwoman Kate, almost 3 years, because she was appointed during a special election. All of those big ticket items, those wants, so to speak, were voted by only a few members on this council. So for someone to say we should analyze needs versus wants, where was that philosophy when those votes were happening years ago? Because I do agree with that, but you can't vote for something then and think it's a good idea with the assumption or the philosophy of needs versus wants, and incur those costs on our taxpayers, and then now that it's unpopular, now that we have to pay catch-up, throw a proven plan out the window. It's very unfortunate, in my opinion. And to the thought of volunteers, if I may touch on that just for a moment, that's kind of one of my specialties with my professional background. I was over volunteers at the White House in Washington, D.C. I managed volunteers for the Utah chapter of the American Cancer Society. I then managed volunteers for Primary Children's Medical Center in their nonprofit sector. Quite glamorous places, if you would agree with me, maybe not. Even in those places, it was really hard to get volunteers to always stick to a schedule. I'm now over the youth council for Bountiful City, a wonderful group of youth, and they are, in a lot of ways, the volunteer arm for the city. We'll be at Coats for Kids next weekend. Even those kids who are incredible youth, high-achieving youth, committed to the youth council. When we interview them for the youth council, we say we needed a commitment to come to X amount of meetings, X amount of activities. Even they sometimes don't show up. It's a wonderful thought, and I do agree that people in Bountiful are very willing to give their time. This has been, as all of my colleagues have said, a very, very tough decision. Excuse me. I know people are hurting. I have close friends on Medicaid and welfare. This decision has not been made lightly. However, excuse me, I'm pregnant, so maybe that's why. As stewards of this city, as people who recognize the burden that this is on our residents, thank you. Excuse me. Unfortunately, the responsible thing for us to do is to put our city in a good position moving forward. So we're not kicking the can down the road. We're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't. We're damned if we raise taxes now because it places the burden on all of the people in this room. We're damned if we don't because then it places the burden on people years from now. Either way, we're in trouble. However, the 5 of us have this decision placed before us. We have the data, we have wonderful experts, and there has been a lot of discussion on this. So that is where I am, and please excuse my tears.
Anything else, Millie?
No.
No. So it's about time that we have a motion, and I will, I do want to say this. Oh, thank you. Oh, Gary.
Thank you. I do need to make a correction.
Okay.
And an apology to my esteemed predecessor.
Okay.
Tom, he was close to right about the 67%. It's actually 69% increase in sales tax over the years. So I did look at the numbers. We don't have to go into the sandbox and look at the numbers together, Tom. I apologize. What it doesn't change, however, is the fact that since that period of time where we used to allocate roughly 70% of that money to our capital replacement fund, we're now only allocating 25%. Because it's the only growing revenue, we've had to use it to plug our operational holes. So I apologize, Tom, and the public for the misinformation.
Thank you. So just finally for me, I think some of you might want to know where I stand here with this, and that's reasonable since I'm running for mayor. And I've been through this whole process. I just have no doubt that we're doing the right thing with our reserve funds and what has been proposed to the council. So although I don't have a vote, and it would be better for me if we didn't, it'd be better for me to try to be mayor again if we didn't have taxation this year, for sure. But have you ever done the right thing and felt bad about it? And so I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm not going to feel bad about it. I'm just going to let you know that this is where I stand. So if anybody asks, well, where was the mayor? What was his transparency? I am for this, no doubt about it. And now I look for a motion.
Mayor, could I first congratulate Councilmember Barr on her announcement?
Sorry.
Yes.
That's pretty
I
exciting
really am.
news.
I apologize. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd be happy to make a motion then. And when I say happy, I mean I feel a responsibility to make a motion that we approve ordinance 2021-09, setting our property tax rate at the proposed .000967 rate for our 21 taxes, and also to adopt the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget as has been presented.
And do I have a second?
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Any further discussion?
My further discussion is just that I truly see a need for some of these things, but I really feel that we should not be afraid to wait and see. We have time on our side. With the reserves, there's not a reason to, if we act in 1 year or 2 years, we still have time to make up the reserves that we would lose. So I would support a tax increase if it was 15% for the things that I feel like are essential right now.
Thank you, Kendallin.
Mayor,
Any
if
other
I could,
comments?
Another discussion item. I don't want to kick the can down the road to someone else. I'm the one that approved the projects I'm proud of the projects that we've done. I've voted with members of this council to approve those projects, and I'm willing to accept the responsibility and vote for this increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We'll do it. Do we need to do this as a roll call vote?
You can.
Please, let's do it.
I have generated this highly sophisticated random name draw thing here, so
Took you all night.
it did. It gave me something to do while we were listening to you guys, to all the meeting. But I just randomly picked these up, and we're going to start with Councilmember Segura Bar.
Aye.
Next is Councilmember Harris.
Nay.
Next is Councilmember Simonson.
Aye.
Next is Councilmember Bradshaw.
Aye.
And next is Councilmember Higginson.
Aye.
Thank you. That is approved, that ordinance. And thank all of you for your hard work, all of you, the staff, the city council, and honestly, I thank you all for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being patient. It was a long meeting, maybe not as long as I thought it would be tonight, to tell you the truth. But you're really good people. You know, I feel a lot of love for all of you in Bountiful. I do. I've been here 42 years. I feel a lot of love for the residents of Bountiful. Thank you for all that you do. We'll excuse you. Oh, I haven't asked for an adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thanks, Kendallin.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, now we can go.